you'd like to speak. I will be back in a few minutes to give you a few more details around that, but with that, I'd like to introduce Attorney General Bob Ferguson.
Hey, thanks so much, Sahar. And my gosh, I think, Sahar, if I'm reading this right, it looks like we have 230. Well, it keeps changing every time I look down. It looks like about 240 folks are participating. I think the AG's office, we're well represented with maybe 8 or 9 folks, I think. So we've got close to 250 folks now just from the community. So first, just thanks to all of you. I know everybody's got very busy lives, and just appreciate all of you taking time to join us for this really kind of unique gathering. The Office Attorney General, we don't do public hearings. That's really not part of our job description. So first, I want to thank Sahar and my entire team that's put this together. And so I appreciate your patience with me and my team, because this is new for us. When I was back on the King County Council, we had public testimony every day of the week, literally down at the county courthouse. In the AG's office, that's not what we do. So my team's really put this together so we can hear from you on an issue that I think all of us care about, and that is the future of the National Archives here in Seattle that serves this entire region, Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, with really the DNA of our region. And so we're really here to hear your stories. So I'll be brief and just setting this up a little bit before I turn this back over to Sahar. One thing I do want to highlight is, because so many people have come in just since I started speaking, if you want to speak under the public testimony, please enter your full name in the chat. I think I'm saying that right, Sahar, right? Enter your full name. And Sahar is going to call out names in the order in which people came in. So please do enter your name now while I'm speaking if you wish to chat. I want to also mention that this is being recorded, and we're having a transcript made of this hearing. So we're treating this as essentially a public hearing, and we're going to take the recording and the transcript and send it to the federal agencies that have been involved in the decision to sell the National Archives and move those records 1,000 miles away. As you probably know, there has been no public process for this very significant decision. So we just thought we would have a public hearing and send the public hearing to those individuals working in those agencies so they have the benefit of hearing from the public. It is, to me, shocking, to be honest, that a decision of this magnitude would not merit any interest in these agencies in actually hearing from all of you, the people of our region, about what this decision means. I mentioned earlier, I used to be on the King County Council. We had public hearings on everything we took up. Big issue, small issue, didn't matter. We always started with a chance for the public to weigh in. Yet a decision of this magnitude, these agencies have not had any public hearing at all, and that does not seem right. The bottom line is they are indifferent to the views of the people of this region. They don't seem to care what our views are. And so it's my objective to communicate to them your voice in this process. As you know, and I'll just give a very brief update, my office is leading a coalition of plaintiffs, about 40 plaintiffs, in filing a lawsuit challenging this decision. We're in federal court here in Seattle. It's a coalition of 29 federally recognized tribes, tribal entities, and tribal communities from Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. We have community organizations, historical preservation societies, museums, you name it. It's a broad coalition. The state of Oregon has joined the litigation, and other plaintiffs are still joining as well. We have filed a motion for what we call a preliminary injunction. That's just a fancy term for saying, hey, Judge Kuhnauer, this sale could be happening imminently, so we need to get in front of you right away and get a decision to put a stop to that sale. Obviously, once the sale happens, winning in court is too late. So we're trying to get before the judge right away, and we expect that will happen. We're working on right now a date for that hearing, but we expect it to be quite soon. Again, if you just joined, please enter your name in the chat, your full name if you wish to speak. Sahar will be calling folks in the order in which they enter their names there in the chat, so please do. I see now we're up to 300 folks, so it's a huge group. Maybe just one more thing I'll say before I turn this back over to Sahar is that, if I was giving public testimony at this, what I would say is I would be channeling my late father, Murray Ferguson, who was a great dad and a man of this state, born and raised here. He loved the National Archives. My mom's still alive. My mom, dad, I'm one of 7 kids. My dad was a busy guy, driving 6 boys and his daughter around to soccer practices and basketball practices, and you get the idea, church and all the rest. Yet he loved that place and spent a lot of time there. It was important to him. And the documents that were there were important to him and his story as a Washingtonian. And I know if he was alive today, I know what he'd be doing right now. He'd be learning at the age of 92 how to work Zoom so he could testify on this issue. I'm sure of that. There is no doubt in my mind. He'd be writing letters. He'd be outraged by what's happening. And frankly, I'm outraged as well. And so my team is working very hard on this case with that coalition of partners, and we really appreciate that coalition. I know we're going to hear from a few elected officials to kick us off, Sahar. I think they're giving very brief testimony. If it's okay, Sahar, I'm just going to mention their names quickly. I think you're going to introduce them as well, but we're really honored to be joined by, I believe, Secretary of State Kim Wyman has been able to join us. I know she's got a very busy schedule, as do all these other elected officials, but our Secretary of State Kim Wyman you'll be hearing from, two state representatives, Representatives Deborah Lakonoff and Representative Sharon Tamika Santos, two city council members, I believe, are signed up, Deborah Juarez and Alex Peterson. And also, just so folks know, the staffs from Senators Patty Murray, Maria Cantwell, and Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal are on. I don't believe they're speaking, but they're listening in and taking notes so they can report back to their offices what they're heard here today. So hopefully Sahar didn't miss any elected officials who may have signed up. I just want a special thanks to all of you and to those elected officials. Those elected officials, by the way, have been real partners in this effort and doing all they can with the offices they hold to help keep these records here in the Northwest. So I just want to thank them in particular for really standing up, for taking time to be here today, and for their testimony. I'll be muting myself. You probably won't be hearing from me. I may jump in once in a while if I feel that the need to jump in, but really I'm here to listen to you. So I'm going to mute myself now. Sahar, thank you all so much for joining. And Sahar, thank you and the team for putting this together. I'll send this back to you.
Thank you, Attorney General Ferguson. We will now have public comment from the elected officials who have joined the meeting. We will begin with Secretary of State Kim Wyman, followed by State Representative Deborah Lakonoff.
Thank you, Sahar. I'm Secretary of State Kim Wyman, and just very quickly, on behalf of the state of Washington, I appreciate what Attorney General Ferguson is doing here. Our office, of course, I think most of you in this hearing is aware that our office is overseeing the archives of the state of Washington, and we have kind of a parallel track of trying to be part of the solution here, because the NARA facility, as everyone here today knows, has such rich collections that are so integral to not only Washington state, but the entire Pacific Northwest region for our state's history and our neighbors' history. And these records need to be accessible to people in the states that the Regional Archives Facility supports. And we want to see that. We don't want our constituents to go all the way to Colorado, or excuse me, Missouri or California to be able to visit the records that are integral to our communities. And we're in the process of beginning to build a archives library building down in Tumwater, Washington, which I will say is also part of what I'm hoping, is a fallback position, because we could have, the NARA facility located near that facility, which would be great for researchers, except those of you in Seattle. But really, my goal is to try to keep these records here in the Pacific Northwest and here in Washington State. And I just want to thank our heritage partners, tribal communities and leaders, the members of Senators Cantwell and Murray's office for all of the work that they're doing, Congresswoman Jayapal's work. And we really just want to be part of the solution and want to work with all of you to make sure these records stay here. So thank you for giving me this opportunity, and good luck with your testimony.
Thank you. State Representative Deborah Lakonoff, followed by State Representative Sharon Tamiko Santos.
Hi, thank you all for allowing me to be here today. Thank you for the invitation, AG Ferguson. Thank you for taking this on. It's been just over a year since my office was first notified by the Swinomish tribe, Teresa Trapone, who's the historian there, who said there is a situation happening where we need to be able to step forward as all governing bodies and historians and citizens to be able to protect the stories that's here in the Northwest. I was honored to work with my colleagues, Representative Santos, Representative Tarleton, Representative Dolan and Theringer, to provide capacity and support to engage with Secretary Wyman. We as state representatives are understanding, and we know that the value of these national archives located here in the Northwest is part of our rich history. It's our story. It's our voices. When I speak to the elder from Tulalip, Patty Gobin, she talks about the hours and the time that she spends touching the documents, reading through the documents, hearing the rich history of all of those who call this Northwest home. I am Alaska Native. My Alaska historical records are stored here. Our Oregon tribes, our Idaho tribes, our California, we are all centralized here in the National Archives, and retaining these records here is so vital and important. As your state representatives, I will continue to stand with my colleague, Representative Santos, and the rest of my legislative partners to say this is where the National Archives belong, and provide the capacity to Secretary Wyman to carry this forward. All of your voices are important, and we value each and every one of you as you step forward. Over 300 folks are here, tribal leaders, citizens, representative, grandparents, aunties, youth, the children of tomorrow. Thank you to our Washington delegation. We just recently held a conference call with the Washington delegation, and our leaders in our delegation stood forward and said, you know, we here in Washington, D.C. hear you, and we will work with you to carry your voices forward. So Bob, you're always a champion. I enjoy partnering with you. I'm standing here ready to roll up my sleeves and get to work with you. Thank you so much for having me here today, and I'll be standing in and listening in.
Thanks, Deb.
Thank you. So we have so many people in the room right now that we are at capacity, and State Representative Tomiko Santos is having a little bit of trouble getting in. So as we work on that, we're going to move to Seattle City Council Member Deborah Juarez, followed by Seattle City Council Member Alex Peterson, and we'll come back. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I on? Great. I have some prepared statements. First of all, thank you, Attorney General Bob Ferguson, for affording me this opportunity to speak out against the federal government's harmful decision to remove this important archive building in the city of Seattle, and also for joining the tribes in this lawsuit to stop the sale of the National Archives building to protect the Pacific Northwest and its history. As you know, my name is Deborah Juarez. I'm an enrolled member of the Blackfeet Nation, and I sit on the Seattle City Council. In addition, I chair the Public Assets and Native Communities, which oversees our public libraries. We are 100% impacted by this federal decision. On a personal note, a long time ago in the 90s, as a former tribal lawyer, I spent hours upon hours in this archive when I was pregnant with both my children, who are now 26 and 29. I can't tell you the history there when we were doing US v. Washington, i.e. Bolt 2, going through and looking at historical documents, journals, data, treaties, and it goes on and on and on. So to see this incredible facility archive to be removed really breaks my heart. If there's anything I hope what people here today hear us say is this: we believe our history lives here and we should keep it here. And I'd also like to add, and I'm happy to share, it's a pleasure to announce that the City of Seattle will be joining this lawsuit as a plaintiff to stop the sale of this building. With that, I want to recognize Seattle City Attorney Pete Holmes for his leadership. I have a few more comments to make. It's very inspiring to be here alongside Secretary of State Kim Wyman, State Representative Sharon Tomiko Santos, State Representative Deborah Lakonoff, and Seattle City Council Member Alex Peterson, and District 4, which houses this archival facility. These are all dedicated public servants and dear friends. Just a quick history here. The archives sat on land that was once farmland of a Japanese American family. In 1942, the stewards of this land were unjustly removed and incarcerated by the executive order during World War II. 3 years later, the U.S. Navy condemned the land to build a warehouse that is now the archives facility in Sandpoint. And finally, in 1963, the warehouse became the contemporary archives facility our community has grown to depend on. The archives have records dating back 180 years. Millions of these records include tribal treaties, artifacts, court records, maps, documents that can never be duplicated. Historians, attorneys, researchers, educators, curious newcomers all depend on these records to ground us in a shared reality in history. These records date back to the 1840s, including millions of undigitized original records. As the chair of the Public Assets and Native Communities Committee for the City of Seattle, I work intimately with the Seattle Public Libraries and the Seattle Municipal Archives. They depend on these records to accomplish the collective work of good governance. Our Chief Public Librarian, Marcellus Turner, quotes, "This move severely hampers regional research by students, the news media, authors, attorneys, historians, geologists, and many government agencies at all levels." Finally, it's an understatement to say that this facility holds a jewel of the Pacific Northwest. Historical documents reflect who we are, where we've been, and more importantly, where we're going. So again, I'd like to end with, our history lives here, keep it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Juarez. Councilmember Peterson?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to make some introductory remarks. I have a strong interest in hearing comments from the public today on how best to preserve the precious historical documents located in the National Archives facility, which is located in the City Council District I'm honored to represent. We must not allow the last gasps of the Trump administration to cause any more harm, and that means we must work together to save these archives. I strongly support the efforts of not only our Attorney General, Bob Ferguson, but also Indigenous leaders, nonprofits, researchers, and other elected officials at all levels of government working to undo the Trump administration's decisions and to make sure they listen to what the public really wants. The Attorney General's office has done a great job organizing a large number of co-plaintiffs for the lawsuit filed at the beginning of the new year, including a co-plaintiff, City of Seattle. On a personal note, in a previous position, I used the archives to help small businesses get loans. We have to preserve these documents here in the Northwest. So I appreciate our Attorney General providing this afternoon's forum for folks to provide their views on how the archives are important to them. Hopefully this testimony will lead to a more just and informed decision. I look forward to hearing from everyone today. Thank you.
Thank you to all the elected officials for those comments. We have a few items to work through and then we can get started. So first, to begin with, if you haven't already done so and you would like to provide comments, please type your full name in the chat box. And we need your full name both so that we can track the order in which you are virtually signing into the chat, but also for the purposes of providing a written transcript of this public hearing to the federal administration. If you are also able to put your full name in your label at the bottom of the screen, that will help staff find you to unmute you. There are well over 300 people in this meeting, and so it might take a minute otherwise. Click on the three dots in the top right corner of your picture, and you can click on rename to do that. If you're on the phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and let us know that you would like to speak. I will call on you with your area code and the last 3 digits of your phone number to ensure your privacy. Please state and spell your name if you are calling in on the phone. Please keep yourself muted until you are asked to speak. Once I call on you, if you're in the Zoom virtual room, you will be asked to unmute yourself. You will get a pop-up in the middle of the screen stating that the host would like to unmute you. If you're on the phone, you will hear an audio recording that the host would like to unmute you, and you will be asked to enter some digits to do so. You will be allotted 2 minutes to speak. There is a timer that will show up. If you are in the virtual Zoom room, you will see the timer, and once the time ends, I will ask you to wrap up, and then we will mute you and move on to the next speaker. If you're on the phone, you will have 2 minutes, and I'll let you know when the 2 minutes is up, and then we will mute you. If you speak about anything other than the National Archives facility, I will have to ask you to leave, and we'll mute you. And once you are done speaking, we ask that you please leave the room and watch the rest of the public hearing on TVW to make room for other folks. Your comments and testimony are very important to us, and we want our court reporter, who is making a record of this public meeting, to be able to get down every word you have to say. Please do not rush through reading your comments, but rather read at a moderate speed so that you can be understood and your words can be taken down by the reporter and added to the record of this proceeding. And with all of those instructions, we're going to get started. The first panel of commenters that we will be unmuting are Flannery Fox, Linda Lang, Rhonda Farrar, Karen Needles, and Karen, I'm going to say Guyland, but if I'm wrong, please forgive me. Once those folks have unmuted, I'm going to ask Flannery Fox to go first, please.
Thank you. I'm from the office of U.S. Senator Patty Murray. Senator Murray is sorry she's not able to join this meeting. She sends her thanks to Attorney General Ferguson for his work on this important issue and for convening today's meeting. The senator has been really appreciative of all the stakeholders, groups, and individuals, many of whom are on today's call, who have come together with such a strong voice on the vital role that the NARA Sandpoint facility plays in telling the story of the Pacific Northwest's history. The senator was alarmed by the Byzantine and rush process to close this facility and has been working closely with her colleagues on the Appropriations Committee to find a solution that will allow continued access to these records. Specifically, Senator Murray requested and secured language into this year's appropriations bill that directs GSA to brief the committee on its leaseback authority and potential closure. It also directs NARA to submit a report to Congress that explores options to keep the records accessible to Washingtonians, including the potential for co-location of the Sandpoint materials in an existing or new Washington state facility. Senator Murray has been working closely with Senator Cantwell and Senator Murkowski on this, and we are hopeful that having senior members who prioritize continued access to the Sandpoint facility materials on both sides of the aisle will serve us well. Senator Murray looks forward to working with the incoming Biden-Harris administration to explore every option available, including the appropriations process, to ensure that they remain accessible to local stakeholders. So thank you again, everyone, for joining today's call and for your continued work on this important issue.
Thank you. Linda.
Yes, I am just an individual, but I spent many hours there in the 90s doing research on family history and genealogy. And out of that, the very valuable records there for that research. From that, I have written over 90 documents in the last dozen years or so that I've shared with my extended family of the information that I gathered largely from the archives there. I hope that the records of the National Archives are not moved out of the local area and that we continue to respect the indigenous peoples and the history that is contained within these records. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Rhonda.
Anya Khusani, Hadyi Adi, Yuklan or Rhonda Farrar, Ayach Sayi, Ganashish, Ganan Duamish Ka, Muckle Shoot, Aniyaya, My Story, His Spirit. 1917, my father and his sister were lost children taken from Alaska. My mom and dad lived in Seattle raising 3 kids, but in 1965, dad drowned fishing in Willapa Bay. In mourning, Alaskan visitors came. Mom never spoke of dad's past. We were raised Chinese. I'm 14, full of questions and doubt. Honoring mom, I only actively search after her passing. 2014, I joined volunteers at Seattle Archives working on Chinese Exclusion Act files. 2015, entering names into her computer. One was similar to my dad's. I see dad, 23, and ready for Chinese Air Force, serving as a mechanic for the Flying Tigers. Oh, you can't see it. Oh, okay. 2015, almost Father's Day, 100 years from his birth and 50 years since his death. I was 64, but it brought me back like I was 14. That file also confirmed Grandpa had fathered those lost children, and Dad had a birth certificate. 2020, my auntie's 1967 enrollment file, a 4-generation family complete with clans and Tlingit names. Both the Tlingit and Chinese worlds merge into me. Now enrolled as a Tlingit tribal member, and I viewed the 1923 ship's log confirming my mother and grandmother's voyage from China to Seattle. Honor, do not remove our roots from under us. We learn from both the richness of our growth as well as the follies of our choices. Ancient ones, Hashikaka, Hashigun, are alive within the records. Everything we have ever been, everything we are right now, everything we are going to become, that is what the archives hold. Ganeshish.
Hey, this is Bob. I'm just going to jump in, Sahar, for a second. But thanks so much for that testimony. I just want to say we could see that photograph briefly you held up. So it kind of came in and out, but we were able to see. Just want to make sure you knew that. So thank you so much for sharing that. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, Karen Needles, followed by Karen Guyland.
Hello, everybody out there in Seattle. I'm talking to you from College Park, Maryland. I'm treasurer with the Archival Researchers Association. The mission of the Archival Researchers Association is to advocate for researchers that require access to the holdings of archival facilities nationwide, including open access to the records and the holdings of the National Archives. Continued lack of sufficient funding, lack of storage at regional facilities, lack of the necessary staff, and diminished hours of operations prevent NARA from fulfilling its legal responsibilities to the public. The American people need and deserve access to vital government records for veterans, legal, environmental, and historical information, and the National Archives has a statutory obligation to provide researchers with that access. Closing the Seattle Regional Archival Facility is a non-starter, and the Archival Researchers Association fully supports your efforts to halt the sale of the Seattle Regional Facility, which is owned by the people of the United States, providing access to the invaluable records of the citizens in the Northwest, as well as visiting researchers from the United States and around the world. We look forward to continuing to work with you all to preserve access to the historical records of our nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Karen Guyland.
Yes, it's Karen Gillen. I am a Seattle native and also account to Washington State pioneers among my ancestors. It goes without saying that we need to keep this facility here. It's so important to the state and to the surrounding states who use the information as well. I am just, when I first heard of the plan, I was just incensed that we would allow and actively use federal property to deteriorate to the point that it is proposed to be sold to developers. And it's totally poor stewardship of our federal property. Any decision of this sort should include the assumption that the activity would remain in the current location, even if the building had to be replaced. So moving the archives out of the state is a decision not within the purview of a property management organization and should have gone through an entirely different process to determine if it was appropriate or not. I find that the whole process has been done inappropriately with the idea of getting rid of property that belongs to us as citizens of the United States and making our lives more difficult as we try to go about our business. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and my apologies for your last name. We have State Representative Sharon Tomiko Santos in the virtual Zoom room. She was completely on time. It was because we have well over 300 people who've showed up that we couldn't get her in the room quickly enough. My apologies for that, Representative. Please go forward with your remarks.
Well, thank you very much. And I have, first of all, really appreciated hearing from all of these citizens and residents of the Pacific Northwest crying out and becoming a chorus of voices to save the Seattle branch of the National Archives. I join with all of you, not only as a state representative, but also through my academic training as an historian. I know firsthand the importance of having access to primary records, and what the National Archives in the Seattle branch hold for us are the primary records for not only the state of Washington, but also for Oregon, Idaho, Alaska, as well as for many of our tribes in the Pacific Northwest. I think that with our very rich Northwest history of being a leader in clean energy with the Bonneville Power Association, of our relationship to our natural resources, whether it be the fish or the forests. Clearly our relationships with the Northwest tribes, and particularly as we think back on the year of 2020 and the rise in recognition of the need for each of us to be engaged in the not just quest, but the necessity of advancing racial justice. The records of the Chinese expulsion and the Japanese American exclusion from the Pacific Northwest become important parts of not just our regional history, not just our national history, but for many of us, this is part of our personal history. I did hear somebody reference the importance of access to the archives for genealogical purposes. That is also very important. It is the records of our loved ones who may have served in the military service. It is simply access to birth and death records, as well as to the logs of the passengers who may have landed in the Seattle or any other port in the Pacific Northwest. This represents the holdings of our history, and the National Archives is our institution. Our ability to access our records is vital. And I thank the Attorney General, Bob Ferguson, for leading the fight along with our congressional delegation to save the National Archives in Seattle. Thank you.
Thank you. We will proceed with the next 4 people to speak. Ron Roizen, followed by June Olson, followed by Dr. Paul Hesberg, followed by Liz Mcclur. You will be unmuted, and we will start with Ron Roizen, please.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Ron Roizen. I live in Wallace, Idaho. I'm a history buff out here. I just have one small point to make, which is that a little historic town like Wallace markets its history and depends on its history to encourage historical tourism. And the loss of any resources for telling that story is also a potential economic loss. And so I just wanted to lodge that small point. Thank you.
Thank you. And a good reminder in the chat, if you are still signing in or just joining us, remember to put your full name in the chat so that we know that you want to comment. Next up is June Olson. Okay, I think we're having some trouble finding June. June, could you raise your hand and we'll move on to Dr. Paul Hesberg until we find June?
Hi, can you hear me okay? It's great. Bob, thank you very much for convening this opportunity. The NARA resource, I won't repeat as others have so clearly articulated, is a phenomenal bit of history that gives us not only information to understand our roots, but it's also a research archive as well. I'm a research ecologist with PNW Research Station. We have labs in Olympia, in Portland, in Seattle, Wenatchee, Washington, where I manage a lab, Corvallis, places like that, and LeGrand. And we have hundreds of scientists who use information about indigenous people, cultural practices, and photography about historical landscapes that is basic data to understand how our forests have changed and how cultural burning practices have changed. We've got dozens of scientists now working with tribes on better understanding the history of cultural burning. What did those cultural fire regimes look like? The panoramas, the Osborne panoramas, are a spectacular resource for understanding that signature. So I really want to argue that it's a historical archive for understanding the ecology of Washington state forest, their fire ecology, the roles of indigenous burning and how they crafted the Western US landscape. And we've been using it for decades for that purpose. And if it weren't close by, we'd be in serious trouble. We publish with it every year with data coming from those archives. thank you very much for the opportunity, and I hope we're able to keep it around.
Thank you. So our understanding is that June has left. June, if you can't hear us or if you're having tech difficulties, please raise your hand so we know how to find you. Next up is Liz Mcclur.
Hi, my name is Liz Mcclur. I'm a retired journalist who worked for nearly 30 years at the Seattle Times. So I'm very familiar with the research needs of journalists in particular, and the fact that, one of the things that I want to point out that I think is often overlooked is that it's yes, there are digitized files. Those can be accessed over an internet. However, the vast majority of files are documents and artifacts that need to be looked at in person. And I think that should be a major point of this. To try to move, just the act of trying to move all these files 1,000 miles away makes no sense and could damage many of the artifacts. It completely discounts the entire state of Alaska, basically. And it also completely discounts all the other kinds of researchers, like the person who just spoke before me. And I'm talking about the press. There's personal research, there are scientific researchers. It's phenomenal how many people use that facility and need the complete access to it. So I just want to urge that we do really push hard. I've heard no solid rationale for why it should move other than we want to sell the property and make some money. And that's just not good planning. There needs to be good planning for this at the very least. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next batch of individuals begins with Lisa Labovich, followed by Ann Bates, followed by Ingrida Gray, followed by Mel Kang, followed by Sue Sheldon. You all will be unmuted, and we'll begin with Lisa. A reminder to folks who are joining to put your full name in the chat to everybody so that staff can capture your name and put you on the list to comment.
Hi, thank you.
Lisa,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm here. Can you hear me? Okay, so I'm speaking as an archivist, reference librarian, and occasional researcher myself. I'm up in Everett, Washington, and I obviously oppose this move to relocate. My first and foremost concern is the burden it puts on tribal citizens with regard to access to important government records. Many tribal citizens are already traveling from quite far to access these relevant records. I see from the chat and from speakers who have already spoken that there are more qualified people to talk about this. So I'll move on to my experience through Burke. I find that proximity drives participation. People use the relevant resources to which they have unrestricted access, and distance is a barrier to access. Any promises of future digitization doesn't really overcome those barriers. In my work, I found that this interest drives decisions in what is digitized more quickly. To my knowledge, NARA already has quite a backlog and low staffing resources. So moving these collections into and all other already burdened locations and taking it away from that local interest strikes me as going to be meaning that they're going to become a lower priority for digitizations, and they'll just kind of languish with this lack of local interest in them. So they're going to wind up warehoused elsewhere and not be online anytime soon. So that's really my concern.
Thank you. Ann Bates.
Myself. Okay.
And perfect. We can hear you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Ann Bates, and I live in the Seattle area and was born and raised in Washington. I earned a PhD in anthropology from Indiana University, in part because I was able to work in the National Archives on Sandpoint Way. For several years, I visited the National Archives in Seattle to research the historical records of the Mcclur tribe and carry out ethnohistorical research by discussing my findings with Mcclur tribal members to establish the accuracy of these records. After getting my PhD, I returned to Washington State and was employed in a joint education effort with the Marysville School District and the Tulalip tribes in the 90s. During that time, I developed class materials with Marysville teachers and Tulalip tribal elders that are still used today. Later at the National Archives, I worked with a Tulalip tribes department to gather information on its history. Later still, I researched the history of the Duwamish tribe at the National Archives to prepare class materials at the former Native American Heritage School. The ease of researching at the National Archives in Seattle was very important in earning my PhD and employment afterwards. I find it hard to believe that a member of the Public Buildings Reform Board would say that the archives are not part of the community. Every day I was there, it was full of people from the community researching their American ancestors and a myriad of other subjects for class K through 12 assignments and scholarly and practical research projects. Moving these archives to faraway states would be an incredible loss, not to mention to the Alaskans who would have to travel even longer distances. Please help to stop the Public Buildings Reform Board from moving the National Archives out of Seattle. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Ingrida Gray, followed by Mel Kang.
I'm a member and a volunteer at the Seattle Genealogical Society. And through that, I've been able to see how many people use the archives. We are right across the street from them. And if we cannot help them in our library, we send them across the street. And we are told that all the people that work at the archives are marvelous and helpful and have really helped people with the information they need to find. It is unconscionable to think of moving it out of this area, especially for the indigenous tribes who would have to travel half across the country to find their ancestors' records. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mel Kang, followed by Sue Sheldon.
Yes, I'm with the Korean American Historical Society, and we're a small volunteer organization that tries to collect and preserve the history of Korean Americans in this area. And if they move these records out of this area to Missouri or to California, that simply takes the records away from us, because we could never afford to access or spend time with these records once that happens. So for small ethnic heritage organizations like ours, it would just simply take the records away. Thank you.
Thank you. Sue Sheldon.
My name is Sue Sheldon. I am the president of the Mason County Genealogical Society. We are also members of the Washington State Genealogical Society. I have edited my comments because I don't want to be redundant with all of the eloquently stated comments already. But this is neither a practical nor effective solution to the issue at hand to move the archives. We are deeply concerned that the proposed decision was made without opportunity of input from us, the local citizens who rely on using the Seattle Archives and Records Center. These groups include students, tribal members, contractors, genealogists, government agencies, historical and genealogical societies, and the many individuals who have their own reasons to access these records. Our combined membership has spent hundreds of hours at the Seattle facility, and that does not even include the long drive up from Shelton to Seattle. We wish to voice our public comment on this lawsuit because of how important local access and preservation of our history is to us. Moving these valuable documents so far away will impose an unnecessary and intolerable burden for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Just in response to the comment we got in the chat, this is being streamed onto TVW for folks who want to just watch and not sit in the Zoom room. That is perfectly acceptable. The next round of speakers will be Julie Stein from the Burke Museum, Joe Conluser, my apologies there, Kat Russell, Chairwoman Nelson from Shoalwater Bay, and Melanie Moser. And just my understanding is that it is Chairwoman Nelson's birthday today. And so while we probably won't sing happy birthday to her, we do want to wish her a very happy birthday indeed. For Chairwoman Nelson, my understanding is that you're also on the phone, so I will make sure to let you know when to unmute yourself, okay? And with that, let's begin with Julie Stein.
Thank you, Attorney General Ferguson. I'm Julie Stein, the Executive Director of the Burke Museum. On behalf of the entire Burke Museum, we share the belief that the invaluable, irreplaceable, and non-digitized records currently housed at the National Archives must remain here. The closure would seriously impact our affiliated faculty, our research associates, our students, and our tribal partners in the critical work that we do to enhance public knowledge of the Northwest and the history and rights of Indigenous communities. I'm here to share a few examples. Many tribes who are represented on our Native American Advisory Board depend on these records to access drafts of treaties, family histories, and other important aspects of cultural heritage. We use the National Archives to study the lives of artists whose pieces are in the Burke collection. For example, William Shelton, a former adjunct curator of anthropology, Chanina Loma-Waima, conducts research and teaches classes on Native nations and federal Indian policy, particularly the federal Indian school system, information she unearthed only at the Seattle National Archives. Many visiting researchers from tribes bundle their trips to Seattle to visit both the Burke and the National Archive facilities so they can access both. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. Joe, you are next.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here today. I'm greatly honored to be speaking in defense of our state archives and also our National Archives branch in Seattle. As you may notice by my t-shirt and background, I have done a lot of historical research on NAS Would-Be, where I literally will get on buses and walk to the archives and go through all the newspaper articles, all the papers of our former congressional delegation, like Congressman Swift, Senator, our former Senator Brock Adams, and others. And I just really think it's important that we have our National Archives here in Washington State. I also have a good friend of mine who works up in Alaska, and I understand she's very happy to be able to get on the Alaska 737 and transfer to the light rail and then the King County Metro to get to the archives. I think it's very important that we keep these archives here in Washington State and not have them shipped off to the Midwest without ample consideration of the consequences. I also see that Dr. Allison Brooks is on this call, and that's a huge relief to me. Because I know Dr. Brooks will speak a whole lot more adequately about the need for these archives than I ever could. But I want to stress to everyone today that regardless of your political beliefs, regardless of your political orientation, your sexual orientation, your gender, your religion, that we all need a fair and an equal and non-biased archives that's accessible here locally. I thank the Attorney General for getting this work done and yield the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Kat Russell.
Hi there. I'm a Bureau of Land Management archaeologist, and I can't speak officially, but every colleague I've spoken with also agrees that this is a really bad idea. We shouldn't be closing libraries, even though there's lots of information available on the internet. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Kat. Chairwoman Nelson, happy birthday. You are next.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. 81 today. Hang on, guys. The Byrd ships came a long time ago. People from other places came here a long time ago. We lost our land. We lost tribal members from diseases we never had before, but we survived. We received help from the government in the way of land, reservations, so we didn't bother the other people who had taken the land we walked on. We struggled to keep our language, our history, our tribes. We learned a new language. Written language happened, and there were agreements, births, deaths, written in a language we had learned. The documents are valuable. They tell our history. They tell our history. We need them here, not move somewhere else. Where are our voices in this decision? Where are the sound of our drums? Mossy.
Thank you. My understanding is Melanie is ill and she has withdrawn her desire to comment. Before we move on, just a quick reminder to folks as they are entering the room, we're still seeing quite a few people enter the room. Please put your full name first and last in the chat so that we know that you would like to comment. If you're on the phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. And make sure to unmute yourself when we ask you to unmute. The next person we have is a phone number that starts with 206 and ends in 780. When we call on you, please make sure to state your full name for the record and spell it, followed by Jolene Haas with Cecile Hansen from the Duwamish tribe, Chandler Phelps, Mary Fleck, and Cowlitz Chairman Philip Harju. So we'll start with the phone number, please, starting with the area code 206 and ending in 780.
I think that's me. My name is Chimei Ho. I'm calling from Bainbridge Island in Washington. I want to just amplify a couple of points that have already been made. One, I think moving the archive away from Seattle, we're also losing the very learned staff. And with their help, I have been able to do my work much faster, much better, and they are experts in the field. And I hate to see that kind of expertise gone. The second point is that my own experience, I'm a researcher. I was very proud that in 2009 that I partnered with UW and the NARA Seattle facility to hold a 2-day conference to talk about the ethnic groups' participation in the AYPE exposition. And because of that, after all these years, I'm still maintaining contact with the group, and I'll be able to do things and continue to use the research materials to understand the ethnic participations in major events in Seattle back in more than 100 years ago now. And the third point I want to make is that Seattle NARA is not only a local research center. Actually, I have many research friends coming from mainland China, from Taiwan, and from Australia. They come here to use the archive because it matters to them. There are many relevant things that can help us to understand a better and bigger immigration issues. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Jolene Haas with Cecile Hansen. Jolene, if both of you are providing testimony, can you let us know so we can have the timer start up again for Cecile?
Yes, thank you. We both want to speak.
Okay, so we'll run it twice. Thank you.
This is Cecile Hansen, chairperson of the Duwamish tribe.
I did.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Duwamish tribe. I want to thank Mr. Ferguson, and I want to let you know that we do not support that these archives leave Seattle. Seattle was named after our chief, and we care about the archives and the history, and we care. And I applaud everybody who is coming on to say and support the idea of the archives being allowed to stay here.
I would like to Tual Galapu Kadisha, Quadapoteet Stud, Blake Shelapoteet Stud, to Opshuf, towards all you people, friends and relatives. My name is Holtzwater. My given name is Blake Shelafo. I'm Duwamish. I'd just like to say that these archives are really important to keep here uproot them and move them somewhere else would be the equivalent of trying to uproot and move the Duwamish people who have been, here since the time of our memorial. These records are really important, not just to our people, but the surrounding tribes. And like many have spoken before, for archaeological purposes and for many reasons, including new people that, there are a lot of things online, but there are some things need to be in person to research. And having a facility like this where we're able to do so in a fashion that allows us to look and see with our eyes the paperwork and the documents that were kept for us to be able to research. Our ancestors knew that this was important. So this is something that I think we need to fight for and stand up for, both as a people and as a city.
My name is Jolene Haas, and I'm the director of the Duwamish Longhouse and Cultural Center. And I just wanted to say that we've used these archives for decades to help research for our Duwamish petition for federal recognition. And removing these archives would make it impossible for us to get to our records. So we would ask that this not happen, and that everybody work as hard as they can to make sure that the records stay here in the city of Seattle. Thank you.
Thank you to all of the folks who showed up from the Duwamish tribe. Next, we have Chandler Phelps, who will be followed by Mary Fleck.
Thank you. For 30 years, more than 30 years, I was chief demographer for King County. As demographer, I analyzed census data and other sources of public data to do research on population growth and characteristics in King County and its communities. My duties included explaining and interpreting census data for clients throughout King County and the Puget Sound region. I relied on the kinds of documents and maps that are housed at the Seattle National Archives facility. Although I have not used the facility myself personally, I have relied on documents and research compiled by researchers using the facility. I have referred clients to it. I think it's important to point out that many of the maps and other non-text documents would be very difficult to digitize or move. The archives facility contains raw census records from the 1940 and before decennial censuses that are essential for genealogical research. Perhaps most important are the historical records for Washington and Oregon Territory before statehood, including negotiation with tribes and drafts of treaties. As we as a nation become more aware of the current impacts of our past racism, including dealings with Native American tribes, it's becoming clear that Pacific Northwest residents of all races have ready access to historical records that shed light on our actual history. Please halt the sale of this essential facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mary Fleck, followed by Cowlitz Chairman Philip Harju. Hi, Mary.
Hi, I'm Mary Fleck. I live in Seattle, Washington. I'm an independent researcher, and I object to the moving of the archives, but I also object to the process that is not allowing people to speak and be heard during the process, a muting of voices that this move of archives is also designed to perpetuate. I am writing a book about connections between the Catholic Sisters of Providence and Native peoples. Moving the archives would create irreparable harm to me and deprive of resources by moving things to a long distance. Moving these archives deprives us of our heritage here in Washington. In my prior career as an attorney, I used the archives to research for judicial precedent that was not available in other places. It's important for members of the Washington State Bar and the people that they represent to have access to these materials locally. Thank you.
Thank you. Cowlitz Chairman Philip Harju.
Knoxwas, my name is Philip Harju. I'm the chairman of the Cowlitz Indian Tribe. I am the son of Lawrence Harju and Phyllis Jean St. Martin, the grandson of Luther St. Martin, the great-grandson of Luch St. Martin, and the great-great-grandson of Isidore St. Martin, who was a Cowlitz Ranger at age 13 in 1854. And you can find those records in the state and the National Archives if you want to verify those. I want to thank Attorney General Ferguson and his team for bringing this to the forefront and taking the dramatic action that he's done. I can assure the Attorney General that the Cowlitz tribe, we're working on either becoming a plaintiff or helping you with some amicus briefs on this, and have my legal department looking at it right now. And I also want to thank Asa Washines, your top-notch tribal liaison, for keeping the tribal leaders advised of what's going on and keeping us in the fight. And I want to say that first off, on behalf of the Cowlitz people, these archives need to stay in the Northwest. Seattle is a great location for them, and we will do whatever we can to help you out to keep these archives from leaving. It's kind of amazing. I've dealt with some federal agencies from around the country, and many of them didn't even realize there was archives in Seattle for Native Americans that had records here. So it's very important to get the word out that how vital this institution is, and why it needs to stay in the Northwest. It was helpful for the Cowlitz in our recognition processes and helping with other federal agencies, other tribes, and in other areas to show the Cowlitz existence. And it's vital for all the tribes in the Northwest region, all of our brothers and sisters. So please keep up the good fight, and the Cowlitz will do what we can to help you out. And I want to thank all the other tribal leaders and elders that are on this call. It's been an honor and a privilege to address you. And happy birthday, Chairman Nelson.
Hey, Chairman, this is Bob Ferguson. Great to see you. Thanks so much. Really appreciate all the support. Good to see you.
Thank you. So the next panel will be Elizabeth Crooks, followed by a phone number that starts in area code 206 and ends the last digits of 460. Robert Franklin, John Beresco, and Dean Dan Jr. Note that we are still getting people entering the room. If you wish to comment, please put your full name in the chat. And if you're on the phone, make sure to hit *9 so that we know that you're raising your hand to comment. We'll begin with Elizabeth Crooks.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Crooks. I'm a resident of Seattle, and I wanted to emphasize that the records should stay in the region and that it's shameful to even consider moving them out of the region. Many other people before me have spoken much more eloquently about how meaningful these records are. And these are a huge collection of the history of the Pacific Northwest. That access is critical for people who are here, and digitization and other remote access are not a viable solution in any kind of reasonable time frame. Keeping the records here means preserving that history and preserving that access, which is so important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next person's phone number starts with 206 and ends with 460. Can you unmute yourself, please? I'm going to move on to Robert Franklin, and we'll circle back to the phone number. Robert Franklin, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes. Yes, I have. Thank you. Hi. I just want to add my voice to the chorus of people that want to see this building stay in place and these records stay in place. I am a historian of the Hanford site and assistant director of the Hanford History Project here at Washington State University Tri-Cities. The National Archives in Seattle, for me and for the people I work with, holds records important to the recently created Manhattan Project National Historical Park. In addition, the records have been important to my own master's research on federal programs in the state of Alaska during the New Deal. The closure of this facility for academics would strain our already strained research budgets, making us travel much farther to do the work of bringing history out of the archives into the public, good. And this is just a lack of public access and accountability by this public resources board. I was a lifelong Alaskan until about a decade ago, and I was one of the last people in the Anchorage facility before it closed, rushing to do my master's research. And I felt the pain of that. And I hoped that would be the only time that records would be taken so far away from where I was. And it's sad to see this again. And I am doubly sad for my Alaskan friends, and especially Native Alaskan groups who can talk about this much more eloquently than myself. I'd like to just two more things. Digitization is not a solution for physical access. As an archivist, I'll tell you, it creates more records to manage and provides unequal access in terms of many populations do not have the internet or internet capability that can access a lot of digital records. And lastly, this is not necessarily the doing of the Trump administration. The board was created before, and the incoming Biden admin does not release us from the burden of saving this facility. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to circle back to the phone number that starts with area code 206 and ends with 460. See if you've had an opportunity to unmute yourself. Hello? Okay, I'm going to move on to John Beresco, please.
Hi, thank you for letting me comment on this issue. My name is John Beresco, and I'm also a local here, born and raised in Seattle. After my military service, I attended the UW and graduated with a degree in political science. My federal career actually began at the Seattle NARA facility as an archives intern, an archives specialist, and then a supervisory archives specialist for NARA down in California. During my internship, I helped preserve records from the Warm Springs Indian Reservation in Oregon. These were original records that were held together by pins and needles that were used to weave the pages together, similar to staples. Those are a little bit dangerous. My role was to remove those and then photocopy the originals onto archival paper for the public to be able to handle, which also helped preserve the originals. To me, it was a small but very important task. It made me feel connected to the history that these records contained. At the UW, we were always encouraged to use primary sources which provide firsthand accounts of events. Having NARA here in Seattle has helped countless people in the same way that it helped me. It's hard to imagine the full impact of losing access to these records. When NARA in Southern California was faced with a similar issue of cost that was in Laguna Niguel, it relocated the historical records from Laguna Niguel to Paris, California, to a new facility that was designed to preserve those historical records. And that also kept the records local right there in Southern California. I have seen firsthand the interaction between staff at NARA and the public, and it serves a very important academic role that is invaluable. I believe that this relationship can be preserved by using the Laguna Niguel relocation as a model for doing what's best for our community as well as the records. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Sahar, this is Bob. If I'm just jumping just for 1 second, just say thanks for that testimony. And just two quick things. One, I want to thank everybody for keeping your testimony under the 2 minutes, and it just helps us move it along. I just really appreciate that. And number two, I know a lot of folks have joined in since I think I or Sahar mentioned this, is that all this testimony, we have someone transcribing everything that's being said. We're recording this. And so all the testimony that's being made here today will all be delivered in written form and visual form to the individuals on these boards who are making this decision. So I just wanted to reinforce that for folks who joined Sahar, since we mentioned that about an hour or so ago. Thanks, Sahar.
That's great. Thank you. Dean Dan Jr., please.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dean Dan Jr. My traditional name is Wadapa. I'm a member of the Swinomish Indian tribal community. And for me, the archives building has much to do with my ancestry. My ancestry runs deep within the indigenous communities and the groups within all of Western Washington. I have family from Mcclur to Squaxin Island, Tulalip, Swinomish, Lummi, Upper Skagit, and many other areas. It's vitally important that these records are kept here in Washington, not only for us as tribes, but also for all Washingtonians. This building helps all of Washingtonians understand the relationship that has existed for many, many years and decades since the time of the treaty. So we can learn to understand from these archives how we can move forward in honoring these ancient documents and these testimonies that came before this moment in time. So with that being said, with all my relatives and all my heart, I thank everyone for working hard to protect this place and keep it here in Washington. I raise my hands to everyone. Tigwiti, thank you.
Thank you. The next panel will be Jeremy Walls, followed by Kathy Saskowski, followed by Rebecca Black, followed by Teresa Trebone, followed by Colleen McAleer. My apologies there. Staff are having some trouble finding Jeremy Walls to unmute. So Jeremy, if you could raise your hand, that would help. And we'll start with Kathy Saskowski first. Thank you.
Oops. Hello, my name is Kathy Saskowski. I'm a member of the Orcas Island Genealogy Group here from the San Juan Islands. And I just want to say that I am in favor of the archives staying in Seattle. They hold our history, as everybody has said, but a voice here from the San Juan Islands that has got some significant history as well as everywhere else. I am in favor of the archives staying in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you. Move on to Rebecca Black, please.
OCMCIA, Rebecca Black, Quinault Indian Nation. I'm just here in support of keeping our national archives and the history of our Northwest tribes within reach of the people of our nations. As a person who has spent a great deal of time at the National Archives, there's nothing that can replace the holding of documents that contain the signatures of my ancestors. There is nothing that you can digitize that can replace the spiritual and emotional connection that we as Indigenous people of the Northwest have to our people and to our ancestors and to the records that are being held there in Seattle. And to try to make this kind of move without tribal consultation is just wrong on so many levels, you know, in that nation to nation relationship. I'm grateful for Bob Ferguson and your office and all of the tribes that have joined this suit to keep our records here with us in the Northwest. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca, for that testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rebecca. My understanding is that staff are having trouble finding Teresa Trebone. It's possible she's left. If you haven't left, Teresa, can you please raise your hand? And the same for Jeremy Walls. We'll certainly circle back. Next will be Colleen McAleer. I'm so sorry, Colleen, for butchering your name.
That's fine. This is Colleen McAleer, and I am the president of Laurelhurst Community Club. And believe it or not, our Northeast Seattle Community Club is also over 100 years old, and we have 2,800 residents. And why on earth would a community club be holding the archive so valuable? Well, we've discovered why. We did some research on our local area and found out that indeed the summer home of the the Coast Salish tribe, such as the Duwamish and related to the Muckleshoots, lived right here in our neighborhood along Union Bay. And why was that important? Well, when the 520 bridge was being developed and researched, our community club, as well as certainly WSDOT, did the research to find out where the ancestral burial grounds were on projects, which areas to avoid, and where the fishing rights for that area as well too. So that was a very valuable tool to have right here at our archives. Secondly, when we were developing as a community club, Waterway Number 1, which is right on Union Bay, once again, we went back to the archives to find out and identify the authentic artifacts that might be found in our project. And that was very helpful. So we wanted to make sure they were preserved and avoided and left in place. And then lastly, most recently, we use the archives to research any of the discriminatory racial covenants that happen to be located in these areas in the Northeast. So those kinds of real hands-on things are so important. Not everything can be Googled, and I think many folks talked about how important it is to go back to the original documents themselves, because they will lead you to other things. They will provide the context for the information that you're given. So we advocate for keeping those archives right into Seattle and this region for all of the Indigenous tribes, certainly, but for also for folks like us who really need those archives. And thank you for advocating.
Thank you. The next 4 people to speak will be Celeste Meyer, my apologies, Mary Firm, Russell Byrd, and Liz Marin. Let's start with Celeste. And a reminder, if you are entering the call right now, to put your full name in the chat if you'd like to speak, and or raise your hand by pressing *9 if you're on the phone. Celeste, please go ahead.
Hi, my name's Celeste Meyer. I live in Port Angeles, Washington, but I grew up in Seattle, just above the archives. In the 80s and 90s, I used them extensively. I'm a reunited adoptee, and searching for my family and other families was very helpful. And I have also gone to other states to use their archives. It was amazing to me to find out that there are only, at least at the time, there were only 3 national archives, and that Washington and Seattle get to have the honor of having one of the archives was amazing to me. And I would not want this resource to be taken away or moved if possible. When I went to Illinois, I found family records that I had not found anywhere else. And when I went back 10 years later, they had moved those library records, and they said, we have lost so many of our records in this move. And I was never able to find those records again. So I believe this is a form of discrimination, and I hope we will be successful in this fight. And thank you, Bob Ferguson, for working so hard and giving us all an opportunity to tell you our stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Celeste. Mary Firm.
As an individual researcher, I have been to the Pacific Northwest Archives many times and feel strongly that they should stay in the Pacific Northwest. I have 3 main points to make. People sometimes think that everything is online now, but that's not the case. An archivist told me a couple of years ago that only 0.5% of historical material was online. I doubt that figure has changed much. In addition, digitization often removes documents from important context material that tells you more about the documents you're looking at. Pages are lost, pages are forgotten, or copied out of order. My second point is that material would be unavailable during any move process. And as the previous person said, things get lost and misplaced and filed in the wrong place. So it would be unavailable for probably years. Finally, I think that this move would discourage individual potential donors to give their material to a public facility. I have been considering donating my grandfather's photographs of the life-saving service in Coos Bay and Bandon, Oregon, 1911, to the regional branch of the National Archives. I also have photographs from my grandparents' time at the Naval Research Station in Point Barrow, Alaska, in the late 1940s. Now I'm glad I hadn't gotten around to donating, or they could be moved out of my reach to look at them again. Material documenting our nation's history is part of the heritage of all Americans. It should be easily accessible, both in terms of location and in terms of financial expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Next up is Russell Beard.
I'd like to thank A.G. Ferguson from the Duwamish tribe for this opportunity to speak. I'm a Duwamish tribal member. Seattle is my third generation great-grand-uncle through my third great-grandfather, Suquartle, his younger brother. As stated by our chairwoman, Cecile Hansen, these archives are essential to our continuing Duwamish legal efforts at federal recognition. On a personal level, I can speak to these records were essential in establishing my family genealogy back to the Duwamish and intermarriage with first generation of white settlers. Moving the archives is a hardship on the historically underserved and marginalized community of Indigenous people and disadvantaged tribal members. This is related to transportation issues if the archive is moved or removed to another location, lack of internet services and infrastructure to access a geographically distant archive, and furthermore denies researchers access to libraries, librarians, and the subject matter experts for assistance. So this remains an issue for local historians, sociologists, anthropologists, public policy specialists, and academia work in their respective fields. And personally, on a personal note, as retired director and deputy director of national environmental data sets for a federal agency, I can speak from 30 years of experience that data consolidation efforts are of mixed success, leaning mostly towards failure in providing easily accessible national data. Moreover, this is just an example of the federal government putting consolidation and assumed cost savings over the citizens and taxpayers' right to access critical information. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz Marin.
Hello, everyone. Mr. Ferguson, I would like to thank you personally for all that you're doing for us. For me, this is entirely a selfish reason, but nonetheless an important one. You guys heard from my aunt earlier, my great aunt Rhonda Furrer. If she didn't have access to those archives, the moment she and I met a little over a year ago may have been a very fleeting moment, and one that simply existed in that moment. But because of those archives, I was able to know that I have a great aunt out there that I never knew existed, that she has children who are my cousins, and they have children who I now get to know. And not just because of them, but as an Alaskan Native, my father was the victim of children being sold for $10. He never knew who his father was, and he paid for a private investigator to find his parents, and many of those records were sealed, were lost, and we were only able to find his father. But because of those archives, a couple days ago, I was able to find out who my grandmother was and able to present my father with the name of his biological mother. So now our next steps are to see if we can find her, to find out if she's alive still. So the importance of these archives are not just about me, but it's about our history, our people, our land, the water that we traveled to get here. If we don't know where we came from, how are we going to know where we're going? So Mr. Ferguson and team, thank you so much for all that you have done for us.
Thanks to you for sharing that story. That's that's what public hearings like this are all about. I wish I was there in person to say thanks in person, but it's why we have this. And so frankly, we can hear stories like that it's more than just a legal case, right? It's stories like that really reveal how important this effort is. So thanks for sharing that. We all really appreciate that.
Thank you. The next four will be Jim Thomas, followed by Millie Brombacher, followed by Thomas Byrd, followed by Skylar Corbett Hekokta. My apologies, Skylar. If we could start with Jim, that would be great. And a reminder to folks as you are joining to put your full name in the chat if you'd like to comment, and to please raise your hand on the phones by using *9. Thank you. Jim? Looks like we're having some trouble finding you, Jim. If you could raise your hand, that will help us. Millie, the same for you if you could raise your hand. Let's move on to Thomas Byrd while we're looking for those two.
Thank you. Can you hear me? My name is Dr. Thomas Byrd. I live in Lake Forest Park. I'm on the faculty of the University of Washington School of Medicine and also the VA Medical Center on Beacon Hill. I just wanted to enlarge the public's knowledge of the kinds of things that are stored in the archives. I do research on genetic diseases of the brain and the nervous system. And those family records from hundreds and in fact now thousands of families with a variety of genetic brain diseases are stored and are being stored in the archives. And they are absolutely fundamental to this research, and we need to access them as the research progresses. The best example of that are cases of familial Alzheimer's disease. And the genetics of Alzheimer's disease has turned out to be extremely important in unraveling the biology of Alzheimer's. And the records from the NIH Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at the VA and the UW, many of them are stored in the archives. Absolutely fundamental research and an interesting expansion of the kinds of records that are stored there. Thank you.
Thank you. My understanding is that we're having some trouble finding Skylar. So Skylar, if you could raise your hand and we will circle back. The next four are Beth Takakawa, Will Webb, Eileen Mum, and Ellie DePietro. Let's start with Beth.
Thank you. I'm Beth Takakawa. I'm the executive director of the Wing Luke Museum, located in Seattle's Chinatown International District. The Wing Luke is an affiliate of the Smithsonian Institution, and we're also a National Park Service affiliated area. Earlier this month, the Board of Trustees voted unanimously to join as a co-plaintiff in the Attorney General's lawsuit. And what one of our board members said is, this is not just a matter of what is just and respect, but it's also personal. And she told about how her family had gone to the archives and been helped by the National Archives staff to find her mother's passage papers. And this is where they discovered that her mother had entered this country in Seattle, which they never knew until they did that research. We have researched many exhibitions at the Wing with records at the archives, especially the Chinese exclusion files. Also exhibitions interpreting the historic Immigration and Naturalization Service building. That was also done at the archives. And I did notice among the 300 people signed up that our co-chairs, Ellen Ferguson and Jill Nishi, are on the call, and also Gloria Lung Wakayama, who is serving as our counsel for our participation in the suit. So thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Will Webb, followed by Eileen Mum. Looks like we're having trouble finding Will. Will, if you could raise your hand so we can find you, that would be great. Eileen Mum, followed by Ellie DePietro. Eileen, since I think we might be having trouble finding you as well. Ellie DePietro. Oh, Eileen, it looks like you're unmuted. Eileen, can you hear us? Okay, Eileen, we'll circle back. Ellie DePietro, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to share our concerns. My name is Ellie DiPietro. I'm the archivist with the Jefferson County Historical Society, a 140-year-old organization in Port Townsend, Washington on the Olympic Peninsula. I, along with my organization, am speaking out against the federal government's decision to sell the Nara Sandpoint facility and move these records. We object to the sale and removal, and we find the lack of transparency in these actions very disturbing. Distance creates a barrier. There is no digital substitute. The suggestion that digitization is an option is laughable. Converting these records to a digital format is a very labor-intensive and resource-intensive process. It's very difficult to manage how you track things, how you do your metadata, and also the sensitivity of the objects that are being scanned or photographed, and making sure that they're safe. It's unrealistic and it's impractical. Additionally, suggesting a replacement relying on this unrealistic solution further separates urban and rural environments, the latter for which do not have digital access as a given. I grew up in a community of 1,000. I now live in a community of about 10,000 people, and the challenges of securing decent bandwidth or internet at all are real. The records need to stay here in the Pacific Northwest where they can be accessible. Communities, like my current community, will be hurt by the removal of these archives. Communities that are rural, like my community, and so many of the other communities here on the Olympic Peninsula. Primary records are an essential resource for anyone performing research, whether it's public history, personal research, or organizations like mine who help other researchers and interpret history for our region. Thank you for the opportunity to share our comments.
Thank you. Eileen, Mom, I want to just circle back one last time to see if you're able to comment. All right. The next five are Matthew Lester, followed by Katrina Jagodinsky, Pamela Zander, Carl Wasili, and Liz Marin. My understanding is that staff is having trouble finding Matthew Lester. So if Matthew is in the room, could you please raise your hand? And we'll start with Katrina.
I am Katrina Jagodinsky, the Susan J. Rosowski Associate Professor of History and Graduate Chair at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I am grateful to everyone making this testimony possible and who have joined the fight to keep the NARA branch in Seattle. My historical research focuses on the legal mobilization of marginalized people over the long 19th century in the North American West. And I have shared research with the Saskowski, the Lummi, and the Duwamish tribes in the region. The Seattle branch holds the records of a primary regional component of my research, which has earned a book prize, an article prize, and a National Science Foundation grant as evidence of its significance, and is based in District Court, Office of Indian Affairs, and Public Land Office records at the Seattle NARA branch. Tribal members and community members can speak to the personal significance of having the archives in Seattle, but I would like to add my professional perspective. Digitizing or moving the Seattle collections to California or Missouri severs the essential regional knowledge and expertise of those who work and who use the Seattle branch. Researchers like myself who are not native to the region benefit tremendously from the shared knowledge of those who frequent the reading room. Much of what I am able to achieve is the result of the location of the archival materials in their home region. Furthermore, removing the materials from their site of origin requires out-of-state researchers to double the resources needed to carry out vital research in archival collections and in their regional context. To make sense of Seattle NARA records outside of the region, we still have to go to the Pacific Northwest to do our job thoroughly. Finally, as a legal historian, I'm especially dismayed by the process by which the administration has proposed this proceeding, which is clearly flawed and legally questionable and is an attack on tribal sovereignty. I support and am grateful for all efforts to litigate this removal of records from Seattle because the histories housed there are the property of all tribal members in the states served by the branch, the descendants of family members recorded there, and the citizens who are represented in the organizations whose administrative records are held there. The claim to replace local access with digitization is hollow, and anyone who works in that field knows it is a decades-long process for the Seattle collection alone. The effort to stop removal and support historians and organizations like the American Historical Association is very much urgent. And we thank you all in Washington and administration for your efforts in support of keeping records in Seattle. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. Pamela Zander, followed by Carl Wasili.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'm Pam Zander, the president of the Hawthorne Hills Community Council. We represent over 1,900 residents, and it's the neighborhood in Seattle where the NARA building is located. I'm going to talk more on the process in my comments. We learned of the potential sale of the building on January 18th, 2020 from our Seattle council member, Alex Peterson. We were able to submit a detailed letter in opposition to the sale on January 23rd, 2020. It was addressed to Mick Mulvaney, the then director of the OMB, our elected officials, and Angela Stiles from the PBRB, David Farino from NARA, and Sean Benjamin from GSA. To date, almost a year later, we have not heard any communication from the from the Public Reform Board. One of their main objectives is transparency and objectivity. We believe this has been an utter failure on their part. We also listened to transcripts of their meeting from October 1st, 2020, where we saw they congratulated themselves on the transparency of their decision-making. We conclude the following. There's been a series of errors by the federal government, starting with the taking of indigenous people's lands and condemning the property when Japanese Americans were on the site and sent to internment camps, the promise to hold Alaska Archives records in Seattle, and no public process in the sale of the building. So finally, we believe the value of the NARA facility and materials should be measured in historical, educational, and cultural terms, not just financial. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to Carl next. And Teresa, I see that you've raised your hand. Teresa was on the list earlier and staff was having trouble finding her. So I'm going to have Teresa go after Carl.
Carl Wassley, I believe you can hear me. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear.
Yeah, so this is Carl Wassley. Yeah, Angutagayak, Yupik, under the BIA records that you have in the archives in Seattle. I'm an Eskimo, and we have some historic.
Carl, I think you have frozen. I think what we'll do is we'll pause you and we'll move on to Teresa. And if you
documents
can...
that are significant for suggestions that on that loss was a big loss for those of us, I believe, in understanding just within a Western context, just the historical record based on English words in the United States, and Alaska, you know, we operate on a whole different level. This piece of modern artwork. This is if you can see me, this is my family's artwork. It involves sustainable harvest of the walrus tusk. which we have treaty rights to. So the historical documents are important for not only our reference to the history of colonization of the Arctic, but I come from the Arctic. So as a free diplomatic person that believes in the very constitutional definitions that allow us to have free, prior, and informed consent, as well as a public process and administrative deals like today. I support express for the state of Washington and the Attorney General's office to hold this public hearing and to put my words on record. As I express my gratitude as well as
thank you, Carl.
those that have spoken before me, as well as our future chiefs. Thank you very much for holding this public meeting, because it's, as M. Scott Momaday says, we are what we imagine.
Thank you, Carl. Teresa, we were just about to go to you, but it looks like you have to hop onto another Zoom meeting. My apologies for that. If you do want to comment, we can have you go right now since we missed you earlier. Okay. And then I also, my understanding for staff, I think I saw Will Webb rejoin as well. Will was in the queue earlier. Is somebody speaking? Can someone speak up? No? Okay, great. The next batch is Aubrey Petty, followed by Karen Campbell, followed by Karen Borrell, followed by Grant Dinn, followed by Skylar Reed. We could start with Aubrey, please. Okay. Can we move on to Karen Campbell, please?
Is this my turn to comment? This is Skylar Corbico.
Skylar, I will let you know you are in 3 people, okay? Karen Campbell? Okay. Karen Borrell?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? I am a volunteer history writer for Cascade Bicycle Club and Washington Water Trails Association. Cascade is the nation's largest state bicycle club with over 10,000 members. Washington Water Trails establishes water trails and camping sites for non-motorized boating. I research and write histories of the water trails campsites and bicycling routes in the Pacific Northwest, and I use the archives for an important part of the research. My objectives are to enhance the recreational experience and foster understanding and respect for the communities and their stories. My stories are available to the public online and often published by local historical societies and online by parks. This work is unpaid and my expenses are not reimbursed. It would not be feasible if the archives were relocated in Kansas City or Southern California, and it's unlikely that the histories would be written and shared. Thank you.
Thank you. Grant Dinn?
Hi, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Grant Dinn, speaking from Oakland, California. My background on the screen shows a certificate of merchant status, part of my grandfather's documents from his arrival in Sumas, Washington in 1905. I have seen his file at the Seattle Archives, and it was a thrill to journey there to see it and touch the documents that he signed. It's about 1.5 by 2 feet and could not easily be digitized, I would think. As a fellow board member, I'm speaking on behalf of the California Genealogical Society's president, Jim Sorensen, who is unable to be here today. The California Genealogical Society has researched and told the stories of California residents and their families since 1898. We have been fortunate to have access to thousands of documents, hundreds of thousands of documents at our local branch of the National Archives in San Bruno, California, just south of San Francisco. Our members can drive or take public transit to look at millions of historic documents, just as you can in Seattle. And we even have files of Alcatraz prisoners there. When there were proposals to close the archives in the late 1990s, a group of community historians, university faculty, and many others formed Save Our National Archives and were successful in working with elected officials, including members of Congress, to keep this resource in our community. It is in this spirit that CGS is speaking in support of your efforts to keep the archives from being moved to Missouri and Southern California. The archives of this government are the people's papers, and the land housing the repository should not be sold. We understand that promises were made to Alaskan tribes that their documents would not be moved out of the Northwest, and these should not be broken. We support the efforts of Attorney General Ferguson and the entire community and urge the federal government to keep the National Archives in Seattle. Thank you very much.
Hey, Grant, this is Bob Ferguson. Thanks so much for, this is Bob Ferguson. Thanks so much for sharing that. It's just a really incredible document behind you that you have there that you're sharing of your ancestors. So thanks so much for sharing that. It's that kind of history that is, just brings it all to life. And thanks for sharing your story in California, the success you had. So we'll do our best to emulate your example down there, but thanks for the support. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yeah, keep up the fight, because it took a long time, but we were successful. So
it's a deal. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Skylar Reed, it is your turn. All right, it sounds like Skylar has dropped off. The next 5 are John Marshall, followed by Stan Shikuma, followed by Tom Wooten, followed by Ann Prinz and Benjamin Humphrey, followed by Diana Painter. John Marshall, if you could go next.
Yes, I'm speaking here from Wenatchee, Washington, and I want to talk about the Osborne panoramas, which are housed at the National Archives in Seattle. They're a record of our national forests in Oregon and Washington as they looked in the 1930s. There's over 3,000 of these panoramas. They were all taken from fire lookout towers. They're 120-degree angles of view. I have been revisiting many of these sites and rephotographing them. But all of this started by being introduced to the Osbornes by the Forest Service, who had an interest in them. That led me to the National Archives, and actually many, many trips to the archives, many days spent in the research room, scanning these photographs and going over maps. And I have since shared much of the work through museum exhibits, online exhibits, and through scientific journals with collaborators in the science field. And I can say that none of that would have happened if the Osborne panoramas were located in Southern California or in the Midwest. I simply would never have encountered them, and the lessons from comparing landscapes in 1930 with today simply would not have happened. And so I strongly urge everyone to see to it that the archives stay in Seattle. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Stan Shikuma.
Hello, this is Stan Shikuma. I am president of the Seattle chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League. I'd like to thank A.G. Ferguson for leading this effort to save the NARA facility. The JCL strongly opposes moving the records and selling the building. To set some context, when I first moved here in the early 1980s, my wife was a graduate student at the University of Washington, And one of her early internships was at the NARA facility. She is now a professor of history, U.S. history and Pacific Northwest history at Seattle Central College. And she stresses to her students the importance of primary sources. The whole issue around moving this is one of access and fairness. Moving them out of the area will totally remove access to so many people, as we've heard today. Fairness, I think, as JCL, we want to support all our Native Alaskan and Native American tribal brothers and sisters and their nations in the efforts to keep their records here where they're accessible. It's only fair to move them out would just be another example of a broken promise, which our history unfortunately is littered with. My own mother and her family came through the immigration station in Seattle. There are records there of that. There are records there of the removal and incarceration of Japanese Americans from the whole western side of the state of Washington. And losing those records and access to them would be a terrible disservice, not just to the Japanese American community, but to just the history of the Northwest overall. Thank you again for taking up this fight, and I hope we can win.
Thanks, Stan. Tom Wooten is supposed to be next. My understanding is that staff is having trouble finding his name. Tom, if you are in the room, could you please raise your hand? And Skylar Reed, I think this is maybe the third time we've circled back to you, so I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself before we lose you again. Could you please speak next?
Thank you very much. Okay, am I free to speak?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Skylar Corbett Hikuktu. I am a current student of the University of Washington MLIS School at the iSchool. I am studying archives at the iSchool program at University of Washington. I'm a Klamath tribal citizen, and more importantly, I am the child of Calvin Hikuktu, the elder, culture bearer of the Klamath tribes, and the person who was one of the founders of the American Indian movement in the Northwest. If my father were here right now, he would say this, and I know this to be true, that the removal of this archive, which was one of the foundings of us being able to restore our tribe, is tantamount to institutionalized racism, discrimination against Native people, and more importantly, that would be a contribution to the erasure of our Native history. The National Archive that exists in Seattle exists on stolen land of the Duwamish tribal people and other Coast Salish peoples. We recognize and we respect the Duwamish people who have spoken, and I can say what my tribal cousins and what others in this chat cannot say is that if the United States government is not willing to keep this property and keep the records on hand for us to use as tribal citizens, then give us the land back. Give the land back to the tribal citizens so that we can take care of our own records. I will yield the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Skylar. I'm glad we found you. Ann Prinz and Benjamin Humphrey, could you two let us know if you're planning on testifying separately so we notice at the timer twice?
I am testifying on both of our behalves. She had to go pick up our son from daycare.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Ben Humphrey. I'm an architect in Seattle, generational native of the area. While the facility may be a great resource for the region, it is a blight on the immediate community. We can see it from our house, and it's been great to hear the commentary from everybody who wants it to remain in the region, and I don't mean to be contrary to that. So it's heartening to know there's a potential alternative location in the region, and it makes me more comfortable in stating that there's a higher and better use for the land on which it sits. Our neighborhood suffers from poor walkability, lack of sidewalks, petty crime, late night street racing, and generally excessive road speeds that I attribute in part to the poor urbanism of the National Archives building, a building that literally turns its back on the neighborhood with barbed wire. I would like to see it sold and have the neighborhood work with the city and a developer to rezone it as neighborhood commercial, celebrate its relationship to the Burke-Gilman Trail, and provide our neighborhood finally with a walkable community hub. Thank you.
Thank you. Diana Painter?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you to Bob Ferguson for masterminding this. Am in Spokane and I'm speaking as president of the Spokane Preservation Advocates, but I don't want to repeat what others have said. So I'm going to offer a couple of personal comments from me and my colleague, Karen Steele. I'm a professional architectural historian who regularly uses archives and libraries to fulfill Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. I am more than aware of the issues around a lack of access to archives. If not obvious before, this has been amply demonstrated by the last 11 months of archive and library closures in the Pacific Northwest. In response to the COVID virus, libraries and archives were closed for a period of time and are staffed now on a part-time basis. This necessitates that researchers and agencies pay staff to conduct the research, in contrast to undertaking the research themselves. This results in greater expense to the project and significant delays, which in turn translates into additional costs. And I offer this comment from my colleague, Karen Dorn Steele, who is a retired journalist and is the advocacy chair for the Spokane Preservation Advocates and recent co-author of the Hanford Plaintiffs' Voices from the Fight for Atomic Justice. And she notes, I've worked in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. to obtain documents on Hanford for a recent book on Cold War nuclear history, and I know how important it is to have regional access to important records. As the advocacy chair for Spokane Preservation Advocates, we want the Seattle records kept where they are. We've supported recent efforts by the Spokane area tribes and other social justice and racial justice advocates to change the name of Fort George Wright Drive, named after Colonel George Wright, who carried out the brutal campaign in the 1850s against the Spokane Indians. We would not have this opportunity with archives like the NARA archives in Seattle.
Thank you, Diana. The next panel will begin with Amy Nichols, followed by Cindy Barker, followed by Karen Condon, followed by James Powell, followed by Trevor James Bond, followed by Carrie List, or Life. My apologies there. Amy Nichols.
Asiam Nostalgia, Amy Sinisna, Che Wasamish. Good evening, everyone. My given name is Amy. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a member of the Samish Nation. And I'm not a language speaker, I'm a language learner. I am speaking as someone who's on the older side of youth, but still remembers in 8th grade when we were doing a social studies project and we had to choose a tribe to do our social studies project on. And I told my teacher I wanted to choose the Samish Nation, my own nation. And she said that there wasn't enough information available to do a project about my own tribe. Recently, however, I did an internship in ethnobotany through San Juan Island National Historical Park, and I felt really validated in having access to primary documents that proved, no, there is information about my tribe, and it's worth learning about, it's worth documenting, and it's worth people understanding the history of my nation, the history of the Duwamish people, on which, as others have mentioned, the National Archives is located. And, you know, as others have mentioned, the National Archives were really fundamental for the re-recognition of the Samish Nation in 1996. I was born in 1997, and I really think that we need to respect Indigenous peoples and our right to access in place our knowledge and our histories, and that this archive cannot be moved from Duwamish land because it's not, you know, the decision at this point. It shouldn't be a decision of the federal government. It's tribal information predominantly being held. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their evening. And thank you, Bob Ferguson.
Thank you, Amy. We're going to move on to Cindy Barker and Karen Condon. Just a note, James Powell and Trevor James Bond, staff are having trouble finding you. If you could raise your hand. Cindy.
Thank you. I thank everybody who is testifying on this, and I thank especially the government people who are taking proactive action to make this not happen. I am not representing an organization or an institution, but I'm going to give you my kind of every person perspective of how I've come to this. The Sandpoint Archives needs to stay at its current location. When I was a history student at the University of Washington for my capstone project, I was interested in the tribes. And so I did my project on the Duwamish tribes. And the access to that was very important. And you could see how critical those pieces of paper were going to be to the question that's come up of tribal rights. So keeping those local and intact is very important. And that reflects on, we grow history students here in many of our educational institutions, and they need access to those types of records to be able to build our cultural and tribal and historical understanding of where we live and what our area is about. The second perspective is, after I graduated, I served as president of the Renton Historical Museum. So I found out what it was like for an institution to not have enough in its own collections, and how important it is to be able to go to the National Archives and supplement gaps in our own local history with what has been collected at the national level. And those are really, I've heard multiple people say how important those are to our cultural institutions to be able to tell the full and continually unveiling story as we learn more about some of our past histories. And then finally, my mother has been a volunteer, coincidentally, at the National Archives, and she went in every week for 15 years. And she would often tell me about who she'd helped and the people who were coming in to learn their own stories. And people cannot learn their stories if it's not easy and convenient and they can have access. So we will lose a tremendous amount of interest in our own stories, and you can't go forward if you don't know where you've come from. I heard somebody else already say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. So it is now 5:30 p.m. This is technically the end of our public hearing, but we have decided to prolong it a little bit. We'll be switching to 1-minute comment in the interest of time. So you'll have 1 minute to speak. We will take comment until 6 p.m. And then you are welcome to submit your comment in writing, either instead or in addition. And I will put my email in the chat for you to be able to do that. So Karen, if you could go next, you will be our first person at 1-minute comment.
White and J Squeeze Tahaskeen. My name is Karen Condon. I'm a Caldwell Tribal Council member representing the Confederate Tribes of the Caldwell Reservation. And 1 minute has got me completely nervous now. But just for the record, the Caldwell Tribes oppose the sale or relocation of the Seattle branch of NARA. The Caldwell Tribes were never consulted during PBRB's process of formulating its recommendations or during OMB's consideration of those recommendations, despite the fact that the closure of this facility will have substantial direct effects on the Caldwell Tribes and is therefore subject to the provisions of Executive Order 13175, consultation and coordination with Indian tribal governments. Furthermore, the closure of this facility is a federal undertaking as defined within the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 that similarly mandates consultation with tribes. Furthermore, the PBRB did not consider the negative impacts of the closure on tribes and other stakeholders as required by Section 11B3 of the Federal Asset Sale and Transfer Act, FASFA. I just wanted to go on record that the Caldwell Tribes oppose the sale and relocation of the NARA facility at Seattle. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. My understanding from staff is that we're still looking for James Powell and Trevor James Bond. Please raise your hands if you are still in the chat. Carrie List or Leist.
Oxlell, Carrie Tista. My name is Carrie List. I'm Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Snoqualmie Tribe of Indians. We just want to go on record saying that, first of all, the notification process on this move is non-existent, if not offensive, and highly unusual. Also, we have had several tribal members that have done research at the Sandpoint facility over the last couple of years. And we've used that knowledge from this research for our Section 106, our 0505, and our NEPA consultations. We found that intrinsic to the work that we do in historic preservation. And these opportunities would be lost if the facility was moved. We are strongly opposed to moving the facility outside the state of Washington and want to go on record as saying such. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Just a gentle reminder to folks not to speak very quickly so that our court reporter can keep up. I'm sure I'm to blame as well. My understanding is that Will Webb is back and he had been called on earlier. So Will, if you have the opportunity to, or if you have the ability to unmute, you are welcome to go next.
Thanks very much. I would just like to say that Pacific Northwest it has an incredibly rich and vibrant history. Just from the native cultures that have been established here for, millennia, and also from the onset of labor movements in the early part of, the late part of the 1800s and the early part of the 1900s. I grew up on a mountain that was called Colony Mountain because it had a communist colony on it that made its money by selling logs. And I think that is an incredible piece of history that would be impossible to search out and learn about without access to those records. And not only like splitting them up or move is a travesty, in addition to like moving them.
Thanks, Will. The next folks that we have lined up are Chairman Leonard Forsman, Bob Corries, Ellie Below, John Crooks, and Lauren Danner. We'll start with Chairman Leonard Forsman.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this. I've submitted written testimony and like to thank Attorney General Bob Ferguson and Tribal Affairs position holder Asa Washeen's travel liaison, I should say, Asa Washeen's of the Yakima Nation for all the work they've done in this. And I just like to support everybody else's great testimony from the other tribes. And I'm chairman of the Squamish Tribe, Home Chief Seattle, and also president of Affiliated Tribes and Northwest Indians. And just know that the importance that these archives have had in the past, present and future cultural resurgence and research potential for many tribes that have changed lives and also resulted in a great opportunity for tribes to find their historic and cultural identity over the past decades. And I just want to support them remaining here in this facility in Seattle. Thank you.
Chairman Forsman, hey, this is Bob. Great to see you. Thanks so much for staying on, and it's good to see you. I hope you're all doing well. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, my understanding is that staff is having trouble finding the next four, so I'm going to read your names, and if you are in the room, please raise your hand. Bob Corries, Ellie Bellew, John Crooks, and Lauren Danner. And otherwise, I will move on to the next batch, which begins with Jan Alpert, followed by Robin Kawabata, followed by Stephanie Stidham Rogers, followed by Joe Kunzler, followed by Heather Metrokin Cannon. Jan, we'll start with you.
Hi, my name is Jan Alpert, and I am chair of an organization called the Records Preservation and Access Coalition, and we are comprised of the National Genealogical Society, the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies, the Association of Professional Genealogists, and the Board for Certification of Genealogists, and the American Society of Genealogists. and the International Commission for the Accreditation of Professional Genealogists. We're an organization that's been around for more than 20 years, and we're very interested in any NARA activities. And the only thing I wanted to add is we did send a position paper to the Biden administration transition team opposing the closure of the archives, and I've shared it on the website this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Robin Kawabata.
Yes, hello. Yes, I'm speaking on behalf of Save Our National Archives, or SONA. We're a coalition of nonprofit community organizations, historical societies, and others, including the Angel Island Immigration Station, Chinese Historical Society of America, National Japanese American Historical Society, San Francisco Bay Area Jewish Genealogical Society, San Francisco State University Asian American Studies Department, and Tanforan Assembly Center Committee. We are vested in preserving and promoting education about the American immigrant experience. We wish to register our strong opposition to the plan to close the Seattle NARA branch. SONA was formed in 1998 when the U.S. National Archives had planned to close and consolidate the 13 regional branches and transfer the records to Missouri. After a year of protests, that NARA decided against the consolidation plan. We in the San Francisco area continue to support and monitor the Seattle NARA situation. We do not want the closure of any regional NARA facilities that provides public access to the historic records vital to the many different local parties. And thank you, Attorney General Ferguson and the other local government officials for the efforts to keep Seattle NARA open.
Thanks so much. And Sahar, I just wanted to mention to everybody that we appreciate everybody's patience. We had obviously probably about 250 people more than we anticipated for this session. And so we are going to stay, if it goes beyond 6, my teams all agree we can stay on. I may let my wife know I'll be late for dinner, but we're happy to stay on for those. Thank you for your patience, and we appreciate everybody's flexibility. Thanks again for your testimony.
Okay, the next person is Stephanie Stidham Rogers. I understand that staff are having trouble finding you. Stephanie, raise your hand and we will put you next. Joe Kunzler.
Hi, I already spoke, but I heard my name called in TBW, so I will be very quick and just quote Heather Brooke and say, getting that it's, the reason I specialize in the intricate details of bureaucracy isn't because I have a passion for paper pushers, but rather because I have a need to know all the types of information collected by whom and where they are stored so I can get my hands on them. And that's my quick Heather Brooke quotation. I want to make sure everyone has a chance to be heard. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. Apologies. Heather Metrican Cannon, please.
Chmai Kui, Heather Metrokin Cannon. I am an indigenous Sukyak person from Kodiak, Alaska, now living in Washington. And if these archives are moved out of the region, I will lose access to original cultural resources that are very important. Koyana, Mr. Ferguson, and team for doing all you can to keep these records here in the Pacific Northwest. I feel it would be discriminatory against Alaska Natives if the records are moved out of the region, and I also believe that would be a promise broken. Again, Koyana, thank you for all you do.
Thank you. My understanding is that someone we called on earlier is back. Their area code was 206 and the last 3 digits were 460. If they are able to unmute themselves, we're happy to take their comment.
I don't have to worry about that. No, I can unmute him.
Okay. We will move on to the next batch. Janet Way, followed by Benson Lowe, followed by Ian Smith, followed by Caroline Mercer, followed by Kenneth Lockenskard. Janet Way.
Hi, my name's Janet. I'm from Shoreline,
And I attended the archive to do research on the Seattle Naval Hospital and the chapel there, which is, it turns out, the very first Naval Hospital chapel in America, because of we are working to have it landmarked by King County. And so I found a number of valuable records there, which I would never have found without the National Archives ability to have those physical records. We believe that citizens deserve to have access to these records, the Northwest citizens. And if they were moved far away, we obviously wouldn't have been able to find them, because these records that we found are not digitized. And we would not have even known that they existed without being able to access them there. And I wanted to say thank you to the staff, who were very generous and helpful to amateurs like me. And so that is a really valuable service they provide. And so thank you to them. Thank you to Attorney General Ferguson for the work you're doing to try and preserve the records, and the National Archives. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Benson Lowe, my understanding is that Ian Smith had to leave the meeting. Benson Lowe, are you in the room? Okay. Carolee Mercer, are you in the room? Okay. Kenneth Lockenskard? All right. The next individual we have is a phone number with area code 206, and the last 3 digits are 780. A reminder to state your name and spell it for the court reporter, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Ben Bronson. I'm the editor of the Chinese American Northwest America Research Committee. And I just wanted to say that although the archives are extremely important to Native Americans, they're also extremely important to Chinese Americans. This is one of the outstanding sources of information about the history and genealogy and legal status of Chinese Americans in the United States down through the 1940s. And this is an irreplaceable resource. Moving it and would be a disaster for everyone interested in that subject in this entire region. Thank you.
Thank you. The next batch will be Yesenia Hunter, followed by Jennifer Kropak, followed by Deb Barker, followed by Joan Newcomb. Yesenia?
Hi, my name is Yesenia Navarrete Hunter. I'm an immigrant from Mexico who settled on the Yakima Reservation in the 1980s. And I grew up as a child farm worker, moving around the state of Washington until I graduated from high school. Now I'm a mother and a PhD student getting my history, my graduate study history. And it could be easy to understand why a historian would need the archives. But I want to highlight the importance for the public and the local community, the regional community, and the immigrant community to be able to understand the histories that we're coming into, and to understand how we participate in the settling projects on Indigenous land and contribute to the making and the unmaking of the spaces that we're in. So moving the archives means less opportunities for questions, curiosity, and dialogue that builds futures for our relationships. So as a historian and as an immigrant settled on Indigenous land, I advocate that the archives remain in the place that they're in. Thank you.
Thank you, Yesenia. Jennifer Kropak?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, here's my video. My name is Jennifer Kropak. I'm a resident of Des Moines, Washington. I was born in Seattle in 1957. Thank you for holding this hearing. Keeping this facility in Seattle is a must. Access is a promise we made a long time ago, and it must be kept. I am a learning, white privileged woman who attended an apology event at the Duwamish Cultural Center in the spring of 2019. The white dominant privileged culture of 2021 must realize we have an ethical, moral, and financial duty to keep the facility and fund it so it's stable and not a neighborhood eyesore. US treaties were made here, and their primary source archives must stay here. I oppose any more erasing. I oppose moving this facility out of Seattle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My understanding from staff is that Deb Barker and Joan Newcomb are not in the space, but if you are and we're just not seeing you, please raise your hand. We'll move on to the next batch. James Michael Ryan, followed by Kevin McCraney, followed by Sally Buckingham, followed by Bruce Finlayson. James, would you like to go first? Okay, let's move on to Kevin McCraney. Okay, Sally Buckingham. Okay, Bruce Finlayson. Looks like staff are not seeing you. Bruce, please raise your hand if any of you are here and we're not seeing you. I'm going to move on to the next batch. M. Gail Hansen, followed by Trish Hackett Nicola, followed by Cass Hartnett, followed by Phil Massey, followed by James P. Thomas. M. Gail Hansen, would you like to go next? Okay, let's move on to Trish Hackett Nicola.
Hi, I'm a genealogist and historian. I volunteer at the National Archives and work with the Chinese Exclusion Act files. The archives holds 50,000 case files of Chinese who entered the United States through Seattle and the Pacific Northwest ports. I'm one of 7 volunteers indexing the Exclusion Act files. We are adding metadata to make the records more accessible to Chinese descendants and writers and researchers. If the archives are moved, we volunteers will not be able to continue our valuable work. It would be fantastic if the files could be scanned, but as other people have already mentioned, it's not very practical and it's not going to happen very soon. We need to keep all the records here. Thank you.
Thank you. Cass Hartnett. Okay, we'll move on to Phil Massey. Okay, moving on to James P. Thomas. Okay, again, if you are in the room and we're just not seeing you, please raise your hand. Otherwise, the next batch is Barbara Dunson, followed by Julie Ziegler, followed by Elizabeth Riggs, followed by Roseanne Royer, followed by Gary Morishima. Barbara Dunson. Okay. Julie Ziegler. Okay. Elizabeth Riggs. I think Roseanne Royer. Gary Morishima. Oh, Roseanne, it looks like you need to unmute. All right, we'll circle back. The last three that I've got are Craig Holstein. Oh, I've got a few more. Followed by Chris Moore, followed by Michaela Taylor. So let's see, Roseanne, have you unmuted? No? Okay, Craig Holstein?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes.
Yes, I'm a fourth generation Washingtonian, and I've done research at the archives many times. Once I was able to find the preemption homestead files for my great-grandparents' homesteads in Klickitat County. And this was after going to the National Archives, contacting them, and they couldn't find the records at the National Archives. They said that those records, because of a class action suit, had been sent to the BLM in Portland. The BLM I contacted, they told me that they didn't have them. After a while, we found them. They found them in the National Archives and Record Center there in Seattle. So that was very fortuitous and helped me document the history of my family. And I had to go visit the archives in order to access those records because of the indices they keep there at the archives. I've also done research in the Bureau of Public Roads records as part of my job at the DOT, and in U.S. Forest Service Regional Office records there in Seattle. And it was extremely valuable. So I am opposed to closing that facility. Thank you, Bob, for all you do for that.
Thank you, Craig. Chris Moore?
Yes, hi. Chris Moore. I'm the Executive Director of the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation. We would like to thank Attorney General Ferguson and his entire team for the work that you guys have put into this, and very much appreciate the opportunity to be a plaintiff as part of the suit as well. We're honored to be a part of it. Just wanted to speak quickly to a couple of the very specific federal programs that the archives and research there helps support. That is one, the Certified Local Government Program, whereby people, nominators, historians can do research to get historic resources and sites designated as local landmarks, whether it's the city of Seattle, King County, or other jurisdictions throughout the state. It is key to have that available, those research materials available for those designations. The other piece is the Federal Rehabilitation Tax Credit project of the program of the National Park Service that goes hand in hand with the National Register of Historic Places, again, around designation, around economic development and rehabilitation of our historic properties. These are programs that require access to the archives, and we want to absolutely oppose the sale and move of those. Thank you very much for your work.
Thank you, Chris. Michaela Taylor, who will be followed by Robert Wall.
Hi, my name is Michaela Taylor. I'm Yupik. My family's from Bethel and McGrath, Alaska. I've lived in the Pacific Northwest my entire life. I want to say thank you to Rhonda Farrar, because actually before this, I didn't know about the possibility of even ever visiting these archives. So I just have a couple things to add, which is that digitization of archives is not any sort of guarantee. Even if we were to digitize them, there's no guarantee that people in the future would be able to access these, how much information has been lost to floppy disks or anything else. There's the possibility of damage from moving them. Moving them and reducing access would contribute to the genocide and oppression of Indigenous people and other ethnic groups. And I also, as somebody with a background in education, I really want to encourage younger people to learn how to do things outside of Googling, like primary research skills are really important. So thank you.
Thanks, Michaela. Robert Wall, followed by, there is an individual with a raised hand, and it's called Diamond Jim's iPhone. If you do speak, you will need to state your name and spell it for the record. Robert?
Hi, yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Robert Walls. I'm a professor at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, though I live part of the year in Edmonds, Washington. I want to express my profound objection to the removal of the federal archives from the Seattle area. I am a historian who has used these records at the Federal Archives over the past 30 years to recover unique records for Native American communities, especially materials written by Native people to express their own community's interests and attempts to preserve cultural traditions. This includes the records of the Indian boarding schools in the Northwest. These records represent a Native voice of resistance to marginalization and even erasure over the past 150 years. It is clear from testimony presented in this hearing that these records and the accessibility of their physical existence represents an essential legal and social resource for both regional tribes and Native families, which has been extremely important for reinforcing the social and cultural resilience they've maintained for centuries. These records are not mere paper documents. They are a type of heritage, and heritage must not be removed from the communities to which it belongs. The dispossession of Native land, resources, and even Native children has long been recognized as a sad reality of Native history. I urge the state of Washington to continue fighting this removal of the federal archives and prevent yet another form of dispossession of the documentary heritage of regional tribes. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
That
Diamond
was really
Jim?
good.
James Michael Ryan, R-Y-A-N. I live in North Seattle. The board was concerned about the $2.4 million in deferred maintenance and a $350,000 operating and maintenance cost. I didn't agree with the O&M figure, but I would remind them that these numbers are infinitesimal compared to the amount of money the federal government wastes paying interest on the debt. And that facility is inspected and approved every year by Seattle Fire Department. The last thing we need in Seattle is a billionaire developer building even more condos. Instead of selling off this valuable piece of property, instead we should be repairing, improving, and adding to it. In my mind, this is nothing more than an effort by the government to further disenfranchise already underprivileged members of our society. So, halt the sale of the NARA facility. Thank you.
Thank you. We have just two folks left. One is the 206 number ending in 460. If you could unmute yourself, you're welcome to speak. Please state your name.
Oh, you got really
Okay.
emotional.
And the other individual is Scott Manicky. That should be our last comment for the night.
Hello, everyone. This is Scott Manicky. I'm tribal attorney for the Stillaguamish tribe. I'd like to thank everyone for their opposition to this move. And of course, the tribe opposes the movement of the archive. I just want to say something quite simple, which is that I think much of what's wrong with the world is related to colonialism, the last 1,000 years of colonialism, and that indigenous people in unwinding 1,000 years of colonialism need to have their ability to have their voices heard. And these records are an important way for indigenous folks to be able to have their voices heard, to as many people have said eloquently today, there's a need for the voices that have been covered over to be able to be heard, and for the documents that represent the history of the indigenous peoples and other peoples that haven't been part of the dominant narrative to be able to be seen. So thank you very much for everyone for their work on this effort.
Thank you, Scott. Attorney General Ferguson, that is the last comment for the night.
Great. Hey, first, Sahar, I don't want you to quit your day job. You do a great job as our policy director, but I've got to say, if you ever need a career running complicated Zoom meetings without any prior training, you've got one. Great job going through all that. It must be complicated with all that was going on. And so to you and the whole team, like I said to all of you at the beginning, this is not something that we do as an office. So my team is as far as I could tell, seemed to pull this off pretty seamlessly. So a big shout out to all of you for doing this. And also to all of you, the now more than 100 of you who are still on, I just want to say thanks. I spent 10 years in the King County Council. I've participated in more public hearings than I can possibly remember. But I have to say that this one was especially memorable in terms of the turnout, in terms of the diverse perspectives expressed by people from multiple states, tribes, organizations, communities. Oh my gosh, it was, and the testimony was so impactful, from just how this facility is used to, well, you saw, I mean, deeply personal stories of how, the records at the National Archives have really transformed lives and communities here in our region. So I appreciate that very much. And what we'll be doing is taking this information, sending it to those agencies. By the way, just so you know, I've heard from members of the staffs of our congressional delegations and other elected officials and individuals just texting me during this thing, talking about how powerful this testimony was. I think it's really served to, for everybody who's going to be involved in this effort to save it, to just really kind of redouble our efforts. I know my legal team feels that way. We always have known how important this is, but to hear your voices expressed in the way that you've all expressed them, I just want you to know I'm confident it will result in us just redoubling all of our efforts on behalf of the entire coalition to really do what we can to preserve these records and to keep them, frankly, where they belong, which is right here in the great Pacific Northwest. So thanks to all of you. Sahar, any final logistics or words you want to say before we wrap up?
The only thing I'll add is, as folks are leaving, staff will need to stay in the room to clear out and copy the chat. So just make sure not to close the room as you're exiting. Just leave the room, please.
Perfect. Hey, thanks so much, everybody. Great to see you all. Stay healthy. Thank you so much for your support and for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Staff can stop the recording as well, please. Great. Okay.
Asa, thanks so much. I see you there, Asa. Thanks so much for helping put this together. Really appreciate it. Yeah, you guys did a great job. It was really, it just, from my perspective, just seemed seamless. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't, but it came across that way. So great job. Councilmember, hey, I still see you there. Thanks for being on. We really appreciate it. It's great to see you. Hey, I've got to get upstairs for dinner, everybody. Thanks so much, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Sahar, really good. Seriously, great job. You did a really good job. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Attorney General Ferguson. Staff, can someone just let me know when the chat is complete so I know to close the room?
Sahar, I just want to say out loud, incredible job. Nice job.
Thanks.
Amazing.
You did also.
Thank you. Couldn't have done it without any of you. You got it, Ellen?
I got it.
Okay. I appreciate all of you. You've been a great, amazing team. We're lucky to have you. Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.